Hello, welcome. In this short session, I'm going to be talking to you about how you can teach the story of Jesus turns water into wine to children. And all of this information, it complements the materials that you can find on faithfillers.com. So we're going to go through the story. We're going to talk about how you can teach it to different age groups. I'm also going to run through all the free activities that are available for you on the website. Then stick around because there's some bonus content where I'm just going to highlight one tip for teaching children Bible stories, and also one tip about answering kids' difficult questions, particularly surrounding miracles this time. Hope you enjoy, hope you find it useful, and just to help you out, the description will be timestamped so you can cut to the different sections as you need. Enjoy. So the Bible story that we're looking at today is the story of Jesus turning water into wine. This is the first miracle that Jesus performed right at the beginning of his ministry, and it can be found in the book of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And in terms of where it is in the faithfillers.com series, it is the very first lesson in the series called Miracles of Jesus that looks at who is Jesus. So before we begin digging a bit deeper, finding out what this Bible story means, and particularly how we're going to teach it to children, I always think it is super important that we read it in the Bible for ourselves. So I'm going to read to you now John chapter 2 verses 1 through 11, and I'm going to read it from the NIV. It says this: On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Okay, so let's get stuck into what is it we are trying to teach children from this passage. What is the point of Jesus turning water into wine? Well, there's a couple of parts to it, and I think how deep you dig obviously is going to depend on the age of the children. So the first part is what is a miracle? So the way I always explain that to children is it's when something extraordinary happens that isn't normally possible. And then if you are using the memory verse, then you can use Psalm 77 verse 14, which says, "You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the people." And that's a great memory verse because it links in Jesus and God, and that Jesus is God's chosen king, because it says God is a God of miracles. And then here we have Jesus performing a miracle. And then the next step on from that is, because Jesus can perform miracles and God performs miracles, that this is an indication, this story shows us that Jesus is God's chosen king, because we know that because he performs miracles. So if our overview to children is that this story is used to show us who Jesus is, that it's an indication that because Jesus performs miracles, he is God's chosen king, also known as Messiah, then what is it we really want 4 to 7-year-olds to come away with? And I think what we want them to come away with is just a sense of awe and wonder and isn't Jesus amazing, and a knowledge that Jesus performs miracles. But then what about those kids that are a little bit older, or even those who are more biblically aware, perhaps have a lot more teaching at home? So for the 7 to 11-year-olds, what we're teaching them then is not just, wow, Jesus performs miracles, but starting to get an understanding that because Jesus performed miracles, that we can start to believe that Jesus is God's chosen King or Messiah. So I think in some of the Bible study bits I've included in the material, in some of the questioning, you can start to reveal that Jesus did this miracle to show who he is. And then also from that, he did this miracle so that we might believe in him. Now, for us to understand that a bit more, I think we need to dig a bit deeper into the passage so that if we know it deeply and understand it deeply, then we can teach it simply. So 4 to 7-year-olds, we just want to create a sense of awe and wonder in who Jesus is and that he performs miracles. And 7 to 11-year-olds, this is where we're really enforcing the idea that Jesus is God's chosen King, that he performed a miracle to reveal who he is. And the thing that our next step on for that personally is, do we choose to believe in Jesus? Okay, so in this section, what I want to do is I want to dig a little bit deeper into this Bible story so that you can understand it a bit better, so that you can teach it to the children. Because if you understand it deeply, then you are going to be able to teach it simply. So let's get started. So we've already talked about, so that for teaching the children, what we want to do is create a sense of awe and wonder in those that are in that kind of 4 to 7-year-old bracket, or perhaps those who know less about the Bible and Jesus. And for the 7s to 11s, we want them to start to think about for themselves, who is Jesus? What does it mean that he performed miracles? And therefore, how am I supposed to react? So let's dig a bit deeper into this passage, John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. So he does call his mother woman, which in English sounds quite derogatory. It's not like saying mother dear or my beloved mummy. It is a bit more of an abrupt term. It's not affectionate, but equally it was more appropriate than it reads in the English. So don't get too hung up on that. So the ceremonial jars, they were there for hand and foot washing that was required by Jewish law. And they were pretty big. So the jars altogether, I worked out to be roughly 5 bathtubfuls full of water. So it wasn't just a small jug. They were big. First of all, what isn't this story about? Now, Jesus does listen to his mum and Jesus does obey her. However, this is just a side avenue for why this miracle is here. This isn't the main teaching point. In fact, it's great if kids come away obeying their mothers, but there is so much more to this story and so much more that is really core to faith and growth, and that is knowing who Jesus is. So I would not be distracted by the fact that Jesus obeys his mother in here. If you want to teach about that, I think the 10 Commandments would be better about teaching that. But don't be distracted by the fact that Jesus does obey his mother here. A second thing not to be distracted about is about following Jesus's instructions, because Jesus's mum does say to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Yep, we should do whatever Jesus tells us, but it's still not the main message of this story. So what is this story about? Like we've talked about already in terms of teaching it to the children, this story is about Jesus showing who he is. Because he does a miracle, we can know that he is God's chosen King or Messiah. Now, I have 5 ways I think this passage shows us this. The first one, I think, is for all children to understand. The next 2 are for those who are older. And the last 2, well, really, they're just for you to get to know this passage better. So reason number 1, and I think even the younger children can really grasp this, is that miracles are done by God and Jesus does a miracle, so this reveals who he is as God's chosen king or Messiah. And if you're using the memory verse of Psalm 77 verse 14, that we have a God who performs miracles, then this is just a great reinforcement that, wow, Jesus does a miracle, God does miracles, Jesus is God's chosen king. Number 2 is when Jesus says in this passage, he says, "My hour has not yet come." Now, this is a phrase that he uses later on. And when he's talking about my hour, it's not his lunch hour, it's not his hour for doing chores. What he's talking about here is he's talking about his death and then subsequent resurrection. He's talking about his saving of the world. So when he talks about his hour here, he's talking about revealing fully who he is at the cross. So when he says that his hour is not here, in that kind of almost rebuke to his mother, it's saying, my time's not yet here to fully show who I am. So he does a miracle which does reveal in part what's to come. So I think that's the second reason that we can say that this story is teaching us that Jesus is God's chosen king or Messiah, because he alludes to the fulfillment of being a Messiah in that he's going to save the world. So point number 3 is actually John, the author of this book, says in verse 11 that this is about Jesus revealing his glory. So what does that mean? It means that he's about revealing who he is and what he's come to do. So in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, it says this: "Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these, the miracles and signs, are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." So John talks about that miracles are there in the book of John, in the Bible, so that they might reveal Jesus as Messiah, and therefore we might believe. Now, points 2 and 3, my hour has not come, and that he's revealing his glory. If you dig deeper into this passage by using the Bible study, by using some of the group questions, then hopefully you'll start to tease some of this understanding out with the 7 to 11-year-olds. But that's going to totally depend on your group and their level of understanding and their level of Bible knowledge. Now, point number 4, this one's just for the adults. This is to help you understand it more deeply so that you can teach it simply to the children. Now, I was delighted to discover that there are 2 Old Testament images used in this story that indicate that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is God's chosen king. Image number 1 is that the Old Testament uses this idea of an abundance and overflowing of wine as a sign that the Messiah will be here. And what does Jesus do? He produces 5 bathtubs full of wine. So I think that counts as overflowing. And number 2 is that the image of a wedding or a banquet is also used as an image in the Old Testament to say that God's king is here. So in this story, we have not over the overflowing wine, but we also have the wedding banquet, also both pointers and indicators that Jesus is the Messiah. And finally, reason number 5 as to why this story points to Jesus as God's forever king, as our Messiah, is that he took the water from the ceremonial jars and turned it into wine. Now, I'm pretty certain that that meant that there was no more hand and foot washing that day because the water had been turned into wine. And this is a sign that Jesus coming to earth, dying on the cross, being raised again to life, that these things do away with the law of the past, with the ceremonial washing, because now we can have a relationship directly with God and the Jewish laws have passed. And so that's reason number 5 why this story points to Jesus as God's chosen king. So in summary, this is an amazing miracle, and it's specifically designed to reveal that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is God's chosen king. And hopefully you'll be able to share some of that with the children you teach this week. So to help you, I've created a whole bunch of teaching videos that cover everything that we've discussed, as well as a story, animated story of Jesus turns water into wine. And these are all linked in a pack that contains everything you need, including how to use the pack, a series outline, a suggested lesson plan, a blank lesson plan, outlines of the teaching, links to other resources, and also are loads and loads of crafts, activities, printables and so on. So you've got a water relay race, stacking cup game, you've got a video game you can play, a fruit punch craft, a collage craft with templates, Jesus turns water into wine bleeding paper craft. You've got a colour stem activity, water play, prayer activity. Then there's 2 different types of colouring sheets, one easy and one harder. You've got a crossword, a drawing prompt, a line maze, and finally a spot the difference. So everything that you could need can all be found at faithfillers.com. There's also a bunch of discussion questions, a Bible study, a take-home sheet you can print out, and also discussion questions for family devotionals. And like I said, everything's on faithfillers.com, so I hope you enjoy. So one thing to think about when you're doing your children's ministry, whether it be Sunday school, messy church, an after school club, whatever it might be, when you're working with children, I think it's super important that you encourage and help them to create a questioning faith. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that sometimes I think we can get super stuck on whatever our lesson plan is, and we think it's awesome, so we want to churn through the material. But actually, what our main objective isn't that children end up knowing a Bible story better at the end. Actually, it's that they have a faith and a relationship with Jesus. They know him as their king, and that faith is continually deepening and growing. And I think one way that children do that, and adults too actually, is that they have an ability to question and find answers for themselves. That they don't just accept what they're told, but they question it and take it on board and think about it. And because of that, their faith is deeper. So the first way to do that, I think, is to just invite questions and make them natural and part of your lesson, and encourage them and create a culture where no stupid question can be asked. So my second point is hold your material a little bit more lightly. Like I said, I think sometimes we can be stuck on our lesson plan and we just want to get through it. And actually, if kids have questions and they're asking them and engaging you in conversation, and they are exploring their faith genuinely through questions, that is the best thing that you can spend your time on. And it doesn't matter if they don't get to learn the full story or you don't fully get your message across, because if children are exploring, then they are asking questions they are genuinely interested in knowing the answers to, and that is a worthwhile tangent. So it's okay to throw your lesson plan out the window. If children have questions and they want them to be answered, then that's what they're engaged in, and that's where you should spend your time. So the third way I would say we can encourage this kind of questioning faith, this deepening of faith through children's questions, I think, is be prepared to be a little bit scared, and also to not have all the answers. And that is okay. I think it's good that we don't know all the answers, because it shows the children that we too can have a questioning and deepening faith all the time, that we too want to grow in our knowledge of Jesus and the Bible. And I think that one really good way to do that is if a kid asks a question and you do not have a clue what the answer is, which sadly happens frequently to me in children's church, the best answer you can give them is, I don't know. And I think that creates a sense of your genuine answer, that you don't know all the answers, and that's okay because you're growing in faith too. But also make a commitment to go and speak to your pastor, to read some commentaries or whatever it might be that's required to find an answer, and that you have an answer for them next week. And I think as well, not only does that reinforce that you have a questioning faith, but that you are really engaged in growing not only your own faith, but also in growing theirs. And it creates a sense of genuine relationship between you and them, because they asked a question you didn't know, but you took the time to be invested in them enough to go and find an answer. So I hope that some of that's useful for you this week. So the tricky question that I want to deal with today is, are there miracles today? Or why don't we see miracles today? Or why aren't there as many miracles today? And I'd like to give you 5 points that you can think about if you needed to answer this to children in your group. So obviously each of us comes from a different background, and if you don't agree with my answers, that is totally fine. If you want more guidance on how to answer this from the particular background and teaching that you experience, then speak to your pastor. But these are 5 points that you might find useful. So the first thing about why aren't there as many miracles today, or are there miracles today, is number one, we are talking about, particularly in today's story, Jesus turns water into wine. We are talking about Jesus, who is God. And when Jesus is on earth as God, as God's chosen king, there's going to be more miracles, because he was compassionate and he saw sickness and illness and sin around him and wanted to bless those around him. So when Jesus was here, there just were more miracles. Point number 2 is that the Bible spans thousands of years. So there are lots of miracles in the Bible, but I think when we look back, there are sometimes less than we think there are when you take into consideration just the period of time covered. And not everyone who was in the Israelite nation would have seen a miracle. The third thing I would say is I think miracles happen today. And this is going to be specific to the teaching of your church. But I think often we have examples that we might know someone who was healed, or we might know someone who discovered some money just that somebody else left them when they were down to their last penny, or I should think that probably there are examples that you can give of miracles in your life, whether they're big ones or whether they're small ones, that God does intervene today. And those stories are worth sharing with children as examples. The fourth thing I'd say is that it's super important when you're talking about miracles is that we don't always know all the answers. But what we do need to recognise is that God is mighty and he hasn't changed. The God of the Bible is still the God of today. And secondly, that God has a plan. And we don't always know what that plan is. That plan might not always feel good, but we have to recognise that it is God's best plan. So maybe we've been praying for a miracle, for a healing, and we don't understand or know why that's not happened, but we have to recognise that God is good. He does have a plan, even if we don't always understand it. And the fifth thing that I would say to children is that actually there is a miracle that happens often and is amazing and is worth celebrating, and that they have probably seen. And that miracle is when somebody comes to know Jesus as their forever King. That is a miracle that takes someone from doing things their way to following God's way. And that is a miracle of their head and is a miracle of their heart. And if you have baptisms in your church, that is a miracle they will have seen. That is a miracle they will have heard testimony of. And that is a miracle that perhaps they might experience in their life too. And that is a miracle where us as humans get to know the creator of the universe. And that is an amazing miracle. And far more awesome perhaps than Jesus turning into water into wine and saving a wedding, because it is about our lives belonging to Jesus forever. And that is a miracle worth talking about and worth celebrating with kids. I hope that's helpful. And yeah, think about it for yourselves. Perhaps you disagree with me, perhaps you agree, but hopefully it's the type of question that you'll get asked and you can think about now how you would answer it.